Move on to chapter 4 of The Last President. There had been a strange prophecy put forth by someone, and it had made its way into the daily journals and had been laughingly or seriously commented upon according to the political tone of the paper. The passing humor of the writer that the 4th of March, 1897, would never dawn upon the American people. There was something very curious and uncanny about the prediction and what actually happened, and was not qualified to loosen the fearful tension of public anxiety, for the day literally and truly never dawned upon the city of Washington, and well deserves its historical name, the Dawnless Day. At 6 o'clock, the hour of daybreak, such an impenetrable pall of clouds overhung the city that there came no signs of day. The gathering crowds could plainly hear the plaintive cries and lamentations put upon the Negro quarters of the city. By the way, this is a really old book, and I would not even use that term, but evidently it's, just the way it is, sorry. Not until nearly 9 o'clock did the lights cease to shine in darkness, and the darkness began to comprehend it. But although it was a cheerless gray day, even at high noon, its heaviness set no weight upon the spirits of the jubilant tens of thousands which completely filled the city and its public parks, and ran over into camps and hastily impoverished shelters outside the city limits. Not until the day previous had the president announced the names of those selected for his cabinet. The South and Far West were fairly beside themselves with joy, for there had been, from their standpoint, ugly rumors abroad for several days. It had even been hinted that Bryan had surrendered to the money changers, and that the selection of his constitutional advisors would prove him recreant to the glorious cause of popular government, and that the reign of the common people would remain but a dream of the struggling masses. But these apprehensions were short-lived. The young president stood firm and fast on the platform. Of the parties which had raised him to his proud eminence, and what better proof of his thorough belief in himself and his mission could he have given than the following: Secretary of State, William M. Stewart of Nevada; Secretary of Treasury, Richard Bland of Missouri; Secretary of War, John P. Altgood of Illinois; Attorney General, Roger Q. Mills of Texas; Postmaster General, Henry George of New York; Secretary of the Navy, John Gary Evans, South Carolina; Secretary Interior, William Peffer of Kansas; Secretary of Agriculture, Lafayette Pence of Colorado. The first thing that flashed across the minds of the many, glancing over this list of names, was the omission therein of Tillman's. What did it mean? Could the young president have quarreled with his best friend, his most powerful cogitator? But the wiser ones only shook their heads and made answer that it was Tillman's hand that filled the blank for Secretary of Navy, left there by the new ruler after the people's own heart. Evans was but a creation of this great commander of the South, an image graven with his hands. To scooch this over. The inaugural address was not a disappointment to those who had come to hear it. It was like the man who delivered it, bold, outspoken, unmistakable in its terms, promising much, impatient of precedent, reckless of results, a double confirmation that this was to be the reign of the common people. That much should be unmade and much made over. And no matter how rich man might cry out in anger or amazement, the nation must march on to the fulfillment of a higher and nobler mission than the impoverishment and degradation of the millions for the enrichment and elevation of the few. Scarcely had the young president, his large eyes filled with strange light, and his smooth, hairless visage radiant as a cloudless sky, his wife's arm twined around his, and their hands, linked in those of their children, passed within the lofty portal of the White House. Then he drew himself into a chair, and seizing a sheet of official paper, penned the following order, and directed its immediate promulgation. Executive Mansion, Washington, D.C., March 4th, 1897. Executive Order Number 1. In order that there be immediate relief in the terrible financial depression now weighing upon our beloved country, consequent upon the resulting from the unlawful combination of capitalists and moneylenders, both in this republic and in the England, that the ruinous and inevitable progress toward a universal gold standard may be stayed, the President orders and directs the immediate abandonment of the so-called gold reserve, and that on and after the promulgation of this order, the gold and silver standard of the Constitution be resumed and strictly maintained in all the business transactions of government. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the news of this now world-famous executive order was flashed into the great banking centers of the country. Its effect in Wall Street beggars description. On the floor of the stock exchange, men yelled and shrieked like painted savages, and in their mad struggles tore and trampled each other. Many dropped in fainting fits and fell exhausted from their wild and senseless efforts to say that none would listen to. Ashen pallor crept over the faces of some, while blood threatened to burst the swollen arteries that spread in purple network over the brows of others. When silence came at last, it was a silence broken by sobs and groans. Some wept, while others stood, dumb-stricken, as if it was all a bad dream, and they were awaiting the return of their poor distraught senses to set them right again. Ambulances were hastily summoned, and fainting and exhausted forms were borne through hushed and whispering masses, wedged into Wall Street, to be whirled away uptown to their residences, there to come into full possession of their senses, only to cry out in their anguish that black ruin stared them in the face, if this news from Washington should prove true. Chapter 5. By proclamation bearing date the 5th day of March, 1897, the President summoned both Houses of Congress to convene an extraordinary session for the consideration of the general welfare of the United States, and to take such action as might seem necessary and expedient to them on certain measures which he should recommend to their consideration, measures of vital import to the welfare and happiness of the people, if not to the very existence of the Union, and the continuance of their enjoyment of the liberties achieved by the fathers of the Republic. While awaiting the day set for the coming together of the Congress, the great friend of the common people came suddenly face to face with the first serious business of his administration. 50,000 people trampled the streets of Washington without bread or shelter. Many had come in quest of office, lured on by the solemn pronouncement of their candidate that there should be at once a clean sweep of these barnacles of the ship of state, and so complete had been their confidence in the glorious young captain that they had literally failed to provide themselves with either purse or scrip or shoes, and now stood hungry and footsore at his gate, begging for a crust of bread. But most of those making up this vast multitude were the unarmed warriors of peaceful armies, like the one led by the redoubtable Coxey, decoyed from farm and hamlet and plantation by some nameless longing to go forth, to stand in the presence of this new savior of society, whose advent to power was to bring them double pay for all their toil. While on the march all had gone well, for their brethren had opened their hearts and their houses, as these unarmed warriors had marched with flying banners and loud huzzas through various towns on the route. But now the holiday was over, they were far from their homes, they were in danger of perishing from hunger. What was to be done? "There are our people," said the President. They are our people, Their love of country has undone them. The nation must not let them suffer, for they are its hope and its shield in the hour of war, and its glory and its refuge in times of peace. They are the common people, for whose benefit this republic was established. The kings of the earth may desert them, I never shall. The Secretary of War was directed to establish camps in the parks and suburbs of the city, and to issue rations and blankets to these luckless wanderers until the government could provide for their transportation back to their homes. On Monday, March 15th, the President received the unusual notification from both Houses of Congress that they had organized and were ready for the consideration of such measures as he might choose to recommend for their action. The first act was to pass both houses, and receive the signature of the President was an act repealing the Act of 1873 and opening the mints of the United States to free coinage of silver at the ratio of 16:1 with gold, and establishing branch mints in the cities of Denver, Omaha, Chicago, Kansas City, Spokane, Los Angeles, Charleston, and Mobile. The announcement that the reparation thus had been made to the people for the crime of 1873 was received with loud cheering on the floors and in the galleries of both houses. And in the North heard these cheers and trembled. The next measure of the great public import brought before the House was an act to provide additional revenue by levying a tax upon the incomes substantially on the lines laid down by the legislation of 1894. The Republican senators strove to make some show of resistance to this measure, but no solid were the administration ranks, that they only succeeded in delaying it a few weeks. This first skirmish with the enemy, however, brought the President and his followers to a realizing sense that not only must the Senate be shorn of its power to block the new movement of regeneration and reform, but by the adoption of rules cutting off prolonged debate, but the new dispensation must at once proceed to increase its senatorial representation, for who could tell what moment some of the northern silver states might not slip away from its allegiance to the friend of the common people. The introduction of a bill repealing the various civil service acts passed for the alleged purposes of regulating and improving the civil service of the United States, and another repealing the various acts establishing national banks and substituting United States notes for all national bank notes based upon interest-bearing bonds, opened the eyes of the Republican opposition to the fact that the President and his party were possessed of the courage of their convictions and were determined, come good report or evil report, to wipe out all conflicting legislation from the statute books. The battle in the Senate now took on a spirit of extreme acrimony. Scenes not witnessed since the days of slavery were of daily occurrence on the floors of both the House and the Senate. Threats of secession came openly from the North, only to be met with jeers and laughter of the silver and populist members. "We're in the saddle at last," exclaimed a Southern member, "and we intend to ride on to victory." The introductions of bills for the admission of New Mexico and Arizona, and for the division of Texas into two states, to be called East Texas and West Texas, although each of these measures was strictly within the letter of the Constitution, fell among the members of the Republican opposition like a torch in a house of tinder. There was fire at once, and the blaze of party spirit leapt to such dangerous heights that the whole nation looked on in consternation. Was the Union about to go up in a great conflagration, and leave behind it the ashes and charred pedestals of its greatness? "We are the people," wrote the President in lines of dignity and calmness. "We are the people, and what we do under the holy sanction of law. And there is no one so powerful or so bold as to dare to say, we do not do well in lifting off the nation's shoulders the grievous and unlawful burdens which preceding Congresses have placed upon them." And so the long session of the 55th Congress was entered upon, fated to last through summer, heat, autumn, chill, and until winter came again, and the Constitution itself set limits to its lasting. And when that day came, and its speaker, amid a wild tumult of cheers, arose to declare it, ended not by their will, but by the law of the land, he said, "The glorious revolution is in its brightest bud. Since the President called upon us to convene in the last March, we have, with strong blade of public indignation and with a full sense of our responsibility, erased from the statute books the marks of our country's shame and our people's subjugation. Liberty cannot die. There remains much to be done in the way of building up. Let us take heart and push on. On Monday, the regular session of this Congress will begin. We must greet our loved ones from the distance. We have no time to go home and embrace them." And that's the end of chapter 5. And we will cover 6 next time. Thank you for listening. Take care.